Welcome to this episode of the Aquarist Edge, a podcast for home aquarists just like you. Learn more about how to keep a thriving aquarium and discover ideas and tips to give your aquarium the edge. And now, over to our host, Arthur Preston.
There's one fish that most freshwater aquarium keepers have kept at some point in their fish keeping story, and that is guppies. But the twist for today's episode is that we're not going to talk about their care. We're going to go a little bit deeper in finding out where do these fish actually come from, what's their story, and why did they become so popular, why are they so popular in today's hobby. We're going to have a look at where guppies actually come from in the wild, how their native habitats and evolutionary history have shaped their needs as fish, and most importantly, what that means for how we educate them in our aquariums. So whether you're breeding high-end show guppies or keeping a vibrant community tank, this episode will change how you think about these colourful little fish. So stick around, get comfortable, grab a cup of coffee, grab a seat in your fish room, put on the headphones, and let's really get to know our guppies. From the wild streams of South America to the glass boxes that we stare at day in and day out. So let's go back before tanks, before aquariums and filters and so forth. Where do guppies actually come from? Well, guppies are native to northeastern South America and several Caribbean islands, with wild populations found in Venezuela, northern Brazil, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana and Suriname. Now, what's fascinating is that these fish weren't always called guppies. In fact, in 1866, a naturalist named Robert John Guppy collected a specimen in Trinidad and sent it to the British Museum in London. The fish was named Girardinus guppy in his honour. Although its scientific name has since changed to Poecilia reticulata, it's guppy's name that's stuck in the aquarium world. But here's what many aquarium keepers today don't realise. Guppies are not native to one habitat. They've evolved across a variety of ecological niches, from crystal clear streams in upland Trinidad to slow-moving, tannin-stained ditches in Venezuela. And it's this variability that has led to incredible genetic diversity even within the same species. So let's paint a picture here. Picture a forested stream in northern Trinidad, wild guppies darting among overhanging roots, fallen leaves and dense aquatic vegetation. And the water in this particular stream is tea-coloured from the humic acids that come from the leaf litter, and it's a mild acidic environment. The temperatures range between 24 and 26 degrees Celsius, but they do fluctuate with rainfall and sun exposure. This is not a pristine, high mountain stream. This is a dynamic, biologically rich, predator-filled environment. Now compare that to coastal Venezuelan irrigation ditches, where water might be clearer, slightly alkaline due to limestone runoff, and full of algae blooms. And guppies here have to adapt fast. They might develop brighter coloration or different escape behaviours depending on the predators in the area. Now, this adaptability is not just anecdotal. Guppies are one of the most studied vertebrate species in evolutionary biology. Now, if you ever heard of someone called David Resnick or Richard Dawkins, their research on guppy adaptation has been foundational in how folks have understood evolution in real time. And why are guppies so perfect for studying evolution? Well, it's because they reproduce quickly, they show genetic diversity and respond visibly to environmental pressure. In some studies, scientists transplanted guppies from predator-rich to predator-free streams and watched dramatic shifts in coloration, behaviour and maturity rates within just a few generations. Now, what does that mean for us as home aquarium keepers or home hobbyists? Well, it means that the guppy in your tank and mine is part of a complex natural history. It's not just a pretty fish. It's a result of thousands of years of adaptation, resilience, and survival in varied and often harsh environments. So let's bridge that gap between the wild guppy and what we have today in our tanks. Wild guppies were sculpted by rivers, predators, algae, and shifting chemistry in the water. But today's fancy guppies, well, they've been sculpted by human eyes, what people see as attractive or aesthetically pleasing, and also human impatience. Fancy guppies are far removed from their wild ancestors. The strains we see today, the tuxedos, snakeskins, Moscow blues, halfbacks, dragons, and so on, are the result of over a century of intense selective breeding, often in very controlled environments. The first guppies made it into the hobby as early as the late 1800s in Europe. By the 1920s and 30s, selective breeding had exploded in popularity, and breeders back then focused on tail shape, colour density, iridescence, and in doing so, they often sacrificed natural behaviours and the robustness of the fish's immunity. Now, wild guppies are quick, they're cautious, they're short-finned, and they show sexual dimorphism that serves a purpose. Males attract mates and avoid predators. Females carry fry and evade harassment. But in the fancy strains, males are often way too flamboyant to swim very well, and females are often line-bred for colour at the cost of fertility or the survivability of fry. And this is a direct consequence in how we keep them. And here's a mistake many hobbyists make. They treat their fancy guppy, the more expensive guppy from the pet shop, like a wild guppy from a stream in Guyana, assuming that it's tough, adaptable, and bulletproof. But in reality, that guppy may be a 20th generation line-bred fish with little genetic diversity, raised in hard water, antibiotics, and eat. It's a Ferrari in a gravel driveway. It needs specialized care. But even more importantly, understanding where guppies come from and how they lived helps us recreate more authentic, healthier environments for them in our tanks. Now, when we look at wild guppy habitats, there are a few consistent themes. There's shallow water columns, really more than a 30 to 40 centimeter deep column. There's vegetation dominance from submerged grasses to floating mats. The substrate is rich in detritus, it's fallen leaves, decaying wood, and colonies of biofilm. There's seasonal water movement. It's often stagnant or gently moving, but with surges during rainy seasons. And there's coexistence with microfauna. Think of Daphnia, mosquito larvae, copepods, and so on. In other words, guppies are adapted to dynamic, biologically diverse microsystems. And if you want to mimic that in your tank, here's what you can do. You could add leaf litter to your tank. Indian almond leaves, oak leaves, catappa leaves. They create microbial hotspots and soft acidic microzones. You could introduce live foods into the tank, Daphnia cultures or microworms. These boost foraging behavior. And you could keep water levels slightly lower and use long tanks over tall ones. It's also a good idea to use floating plants such as Sylvinia or frogbit to replicate overhead cover and provide refuge for the fry. Now, this not only reduces stress, it actually activates the natural guppy behaviors that many aquarists have never seen. Guppies in the wild are opportunistic omnivores. They don't just survive, they thrive on variety. They constantly graze on algae biofilm, microcrustaceans, insect larvae, small worms, plant matter, and detritus. And replicating this in an aquarium means offering more than just giving them flakes. So here's a strong feeding strategy for your guppy. Give them a base diet of high-quality flakes or micropellets with spirulina or krill, and supplement that daily with baby brine shrimp or daphnia or frozen cyclops. You could give them a weekly treat of blanched spinach or shelled peas, and encourage biofilm with botanicals and driftwood. A varied diet supports stronger immunity, better reproduction, and more vivid colour, particularly in males. But always remember not to overfeed. Guppies forage constantly, so smaller meals more often match their natural rhythm. If you want to breed guppies, you must remember that they breed with enthusiasm, sometimes too much enthusiasm, in captivity. In the wild, females evade unwanted advances by hiding in plant cover, but in aquariums they often have nowhere to escape. So, to solve this, keep a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 female-to-male ratio. Provide dense cover, use plants and roots and hardscape. You can also rotate the males out of the tank periodically, and avoid overbreeding by separating the sexes if needed. Fancy guppies will also benefit from genetic outcrossing, so regularly introduce new bloodlines to avoid inbreeding depression, which can cause deformities, weak fry, and reduce fertility. And also remember something quite interesting about guppies. The females can store sperm, so even isolated females can produce fry for several months. Something that we have to remember is that as aquarists we must never release guppies into the wild. They've actually become invasive in parts of Asia, Africa, and even the US, displacing native species and spreading disease. So if you're overrun with guppies, what do? Well, you could rehome them, you could give them to friends or family, you could maybe sell them to local aquariums, you could euthanize humanely if needed, or you could simply maintain same-sex tanks to control breeding. The reality is that guppy keeping comes with ecological responsibility. So in closing, we've seen that guppies evolved in diverse habitats, they've adapted to predation and change, and they really aren't as hardy today due to breeding pressure. Now, understanding this lets us create better tanks, breed healthier fish, and enjoy guppies as they were meant to be, active, colourful, and thriving. And so as we come to the end of this episode, I want to encourage you to rate and review the podcast on your favourite podcast app. If you happen to be listening to this via YouTube, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and push the notification bell so you don't miss any further episodes. It's always a pleasure to share this podcast each week. Judging by the number of downloads, this podcast is becoming increasingly popular week after week. I'm extremely grateful for the support that's been given. I'm humbled by it, and I look forward to continuing to share with you week after week. Don't forget that now we've included aquarium news of the week. That happens normally on a Sunday. The last one was last Sunday. I'm hoping to release one each week on a Sunday, and that will just be a recap of stories around the news that have interest to freshwater aquarium hobbyists. So don't forget to listen to those as well, and again, share them with fellow hobbyists. So folks, thanks again for your support, and as always, keep learning, keep discovering, keep enjoying this amazing hobby. Bye for now.
That's it for this episode of the Aquarist Edge. Please consider subscribing to this podcast so that you don't miss further episodes. We would love it if you would also rate and review the podcast, as this helps make it visible to others. Until next time, keep learning and discovering, and keep finding your Aquarist Edge in this captivating and fascinating hobby.